We're parents, teachers, and educators, and like you, we're passionate about restoring our culture for Christ. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education.
Hello again, this is Marlon Detweiler with Veritas Press. This is Veritas Vox, the voice of classical Christian education. Today we have with us Steve Nichols. I've known Steve a long time, long before he did what he's doing now. Steve, welcome.
It's good to see you again. That's right.
Yeah.
We go back to my Lancaster days.
That's right. Well, give us a little background on you. That's good. Good lead in. Tell us a little bit about your personal circumstances and maybe career path and what caused you to end up where you are now.
Sure. I was Keystone State my whole life. I grew up in Western PA. My dad was a Baptist pastor, and of course, independent Baptist, if you're going to be a Baptist. But I grew up in the church, grew up surrounded with God's word and people of faith, and church was an important part of my life. Wasn't necessarily the Reformed tradition. That's going to come in a little bit later, but very grateful for that and exposure to God's word early in my life.
Yeah.
Ended up studying over in the Philadelphia area, ended up at Westminster Seminary. So now you could see where—
Did you do undergrad work in Philadelphia too?
What's that?
Did you do undergrad work in Philadelphia as well?
I did at what was then known as Philadelphia College of Bible, but is now Cairn.
Sure.
Yeah. And actually, yeah, our time, my wife and I dated all through college, and our time at PCB, we would go down to 10th Press and hear James Montgomery Boyce. So that was probably our true baptism into the Reformed faith. Then ended up in Lancaster and taught at Lancaster Bible College, worshiped at Westminster Presbyterian Church there in Lancaster, got to know you all over at Veritas Press, and really enjoyed our time. And then we moved down here to Florida and come be a part of Ligonier and part of this college that RC started.
Yeah, so you are the president of Reformation Bible College, which is a college that is on the same campus as Ligonier Ministry.
Yes.
A beautiful campus. For those that have not ever been, I highly recommend. I don't know if it's open during the week to just go walk around.
It is.
Certainly recommend to go worship at St. Andrew's Chapel, and of course learn a little bit about RBC and Ligonier all in one place there. What a beautiful place it is. So you are now the president of Reformation Bible College. Tell us a little bit about the college, how old it is, and really what it's set out to do purpose-wise.
Yeah. It was founded in 2011, and it was founded by RC. So he was the first president, and that's enough to say, make you a little feeble in the knees when you think about it. But it was a trip to Geneva that RC was on, and the old city is behind the Reformation wall, and RC would say, I don't even have to close my eyes, I could just see it. And he was reflecting on how Calvin had the academy there at Geneva, which of course grew now into the University of Geneva. Right. But he was saying Luther was a college professor at the University of Wittenberg. He looked at how the reformers were engaged in theological education, and he didn't want to do a seminary. In fact, he taught at seminary for years, Reformed seminary, taught at the old Temple Seminary, their Conwell Theological Seminary on the campus at Temple University in Philadelphia. He said the problem with seminarians is they know everything. You can't teach them anything. But undergrads, he would say it, I want their minds, right? And undergrads are like sponges, and if you give them attention and time, they'll respond to that. So he had the vision to start a college that's a Bible college because he wanted Bible as core to the curriculum, but it's as RC is unique, the college is unique. And so it does have a full course of Bible, has a full course of theology, 8 semesters of systematic theology. But as you know, and we'll get into this, RC was a firm believer in classical education.
Yep.
So he wanted a true liberal arts, a true humanities education. And so he put into the curriculum 8 semesters of great works. And also, of course, it's RC, so it's going to be histories of philosophy and ancient history and Greco-Roman history and Latin. So he gave us a Bible college with a wonderful classical education, humanities, true liberal arts education as a bonus.
That is. I've known a lot about RBC, but I did not know that commitment to the elements of classical education that we tend to focus on, at least as directly as I might have known.
RC, well, you know more than I, his conversion to classical education and reading Dorothy Sayers and recognizing it and being involved in the formation of a classical Christian school was his first foray into formal education. And then he brought that with him into RBC.
Yeah, we have some real fond. I love telling the story that the Geneva School was an idea that came out of a conversation he and I had when he recommended reading Recovering Lost Tools of Learning. We read it. We want a school like that. So it was May 26, 1992.
I heard about this. It was a Memorial Day picnic, right?
No.
Memorial Day party or something?
That's a good question. It was around Memorial Day. I don't even remember. I have to look at the calendar. I remember sitting in our family room and talking about, we had an evening, 4 couples, including the Sprouls and the Detweilers, and we talked. It took us about 10 minutes to discuss whether or not to start a school. The rest of the night was planning the school because we'd already committed to it. And exactly 3 months later, we opened with, I think, 38 students. And it was benefited very much by having RC as the speaker at parent nights when we were having what we might call recruiting nights for parents. And there are lots of fun stories that could go off on that, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So I'm going to stop about RBC. So it is a truly liberal arts and Bible college.
Right.
But I want to ask a question about college, because one of the things that I see in the work that we do is that if you get students who are poorly educated coming there, it's a little bit like isn't it a little bit like trying to make somebody who's handicapped into a world-class runner? I mean, doesn't it really handicap you? Our market is the K-12 market, and so that's who we're talking about and introducing them to RBC. And one of the things I'm trying to communicate with this question, and I want to hear you talk about it, is how badly handicapped are you if the student comes poorly educated?
So for our entrance, we put heavy stock on 3 elements. One is a pastoral or a teacher reference. And we're a Bible college. We have a defined scope. We only have 1 degree. It's a Bachelor of Arts in Theology. We're not looking to be all things to all people. We're not looking to throw the gates open and have thousands of students. RC gave us a mandate to stay at 200, a nice, small, intimate college. So we want people who are aligned with us. So we put a lot of stock on the testimony of the student and on the reference, but then the other thing is the writing sample. So reading and writing is very important to the curriculum. All the freshman courses, you're reading 1,000, 1,200 pages a course. You're writing papers all through your 4 years of your tenure. So we put a premium on the writing, and those are the things we look for. And then, of course, as we bring them into freshmen, we do have a communications class where we emphasize thinking well, writing well, speaking well as the sort of foundation for everything you're going to do. And we have an advantage here at Ligonier. We have an editorial team that puts out a monthly magazine called Table Talk that some of your folks might know about.
Yeah, sure.
And they publish books, and we put out all sorts of things. Every word goes through the editorial department here. Well, the entire editorial team also have their master's degrees. They all are adjuncts for us. Okay. So it's helpful to put them in the these are professional writers and editors that we're putting our freshmen in front of so that they can gain some skills. So we put a premium on it. Now we will come alongside and help students and help them if they have the desire. We'll help them develop those skills, but we need to see something to start with.
That's really neat. Well, with 200 students, obviously, you're able to be fairly selective, and probably don't have as much the problem as I was suggesting, because of your ability to have enough to pick from. But it has always struck me, and this is something you might further comment on, maybe even beyond RBC.
Sure.
That when we think we're going to fix educational problems at a collegiate level, fixing, it's a little bit like trying to nurse a dead plant. It won't work.
Yeah. I mean, it's habits, it's disciplines, it's grooves in the mind that are set. And if they're in a different trajectory, it is hard to carve out new grooves. You need something there to you're going to deepen the groove, but you need something there to land into. So it is a challenge. And I haven't always been at RBC. I've been at other places, and you sort of sense it in the classroom, the lack of good rhetorical skill.
Right.
But even just it's reflected in the writing skills, but it's also the thinking, problem solving skills that are just difficult to nurture. You want to hop right into it at college, but it's difficult if you don't have that.
Yeah. I remember a pastor of mine talking about the advantage of preaching to a well-educated congregation being a whole lot easier to move them. Same kind of thing. How does RBC relate to the broader community there of Ligonier?
Yes, and I mean, in business terms, we're a subsidiary. We're very much reflective of Ligonier's emphases. As I said, RC basically gave us our mandate and our curriculum and defined us as a college that will focus on theology. We talk about being in the historic Christian faith. We talk about being in the Reformed classical tradition. All that's going to reflect the emphases that if people have been paying attention to Ligonier or around Ligonier for the decades, they know it's doctrine of God. They know it's doctrines of grace. They know it's the value of church history. They probably know RC's book, Consequences of Ideas, and know that that's going to be something we're going to talk about. If you want to understand the current moment, let's back up to modern philosophy and see the font of some of this. So all that's going to mark what we do. Even the aesthetic, RC would say, why do we just have to settle for truth and let the Episcopalians, the Anglicans, and Catholics have beauty, right?
Yeah.
So let's.
I think that's a good admonishment to the Reformed community.
Right. Exactly. God is a God of truth, and He's a God of justice and goodness, and He's a God of beauty. So we and interesting in Holiness of God, RC talks at the end about sacred space and sacred time. And in our application, we think of academic space. So we were very intentional about our campus to create a space, especially our library. It's old world, it's wooden bookshelves. We even created in the center a circular bookshelf.
Really?
And in there we put our sets from the church fathers through Aquinas and some of the medievalists, the reformers, Edwards, post-Reformation folks, Princeton folks. And we say to students, this is the tradition. This is the hub of the wheel. Like you are entering into this tradition. And then this tradition goes out like spokes.
Theology being the queen of the sciences, the hub metaphor is illustrated in the library. That is too cool.
Yeah. And even when we do tours with prospective students, we take them right into the center of that bookshelf and we tell them this defines who we are. So all that is Ligonier. Ligonier definitely is about truth well told. and intentionality in the presentation, not just the content, but intentionality of the presentation. So thankfully, a lot of that has defined us. And, we're just grateful here, because how hard is it to start a college from scratch? But we had Ligonier here, as I affectionately call it, the mothership, who comes alongside us and helps us, and it's great. But the flip side is, people at Ligonier love seeing what's going on at the college, and when they see our students, like we had a Ref Chorale sing at national conference, so there's 60 kids up there wearing
that's great
tuxes and dresses and singing beautiful chorale music. I told everybody watching, like, burn this image into your head, so when you're back home watching the news and ready to give up on this next generation and just want to cash it all in, remember this. There's a remnant that is coming. That's right. There's reason to be hopeful. Anyway,
that raises another question. How have you all had to deal with the challenges in the last couple of years of some of the issues surrounding gender discussion and racial issues at the college level? How have you dealt with this?
So we want our students to be aware and be equipped. So in apologetics, we talk about this. In the doctrine of humanity, we talk about this very extensively. But more to just equip them. These are not conversations that we're having. And actually, because they're not conversations that we're having, I find this kind of interesting. There are Christian colleges who have totally capitulated and have been defined by these cultural moments. But there are also some colleges that ironically are allowing this cultural discussion to define them by being so focused on being against it. And what we've always said, what RC has always said, is the most timely education is a timeless education. So if we just focus on who we are and our identity and theology, exactly, this is going to help students. So we definitely engage these things, but we don't have to define ourselves against them, because we define ourselves theologically, which puts us against them. And again, our students, they're self-selecting. They know who we are. They know what they're getting. So we have a good sense of alignment here.
Yeah, very good. So you started in 2011. You've got, are you at full capacity now, 200 students?
Yeah, we have our head count's over 200. Our FTE is in around 170s. That could pop up a little bit. So
when you say 200, do you measure that in FTE, full-time equivalent?
Well, it's a little bit of it depends, because we're still trying to figure out.
I get those answers.
Well, we've got the capacity of the campus that is actually defining. So we're trying to figure that out. And now that we're getting closer to 180s FTE, that's probably our capacity. But that'll put our head count, up over the 200. So we say around 200 is the number we want to be. And we're very close to that. I think another cycle or two, we will be at total emission cycle or two, we'll be at max capacity.
Where do you find the students head out to?
So we have students who head to seminaries, and we've got great relationships with about 8 seminaries.
Wonderful.
That will take our students at 3 years instead of 4. Okay. So they do 3 years here, go off, do a year at seminary. We backfill the credits, and they get their degree. And of course, they've had their Greek and Hebrew, so that gives them an advantage once they get to seminary. The other thing we find, which is part of this conversation, is our students are getting jobs teaching in classical Christian schools.
I don't doubt that.
Because it's a classical education. And we're hearing from headmasters and heads of school that it's difficult to find students who've had a college education that's classical. They hire them, and they sort of got to unwind some of the things they've learned, the way in which they've learned some things, to have more of a classical integrative approach. And so even as an unaccredited college, we've got at least a dozen students out there teaching in classical Christian schools. We just brought on a Reformed classical education minor to help them even more be equipped to do that. We have students in the mission field. And then the other thing is, this is a Reformed doctrine of vocation, right? We want our students, we want theologians in the pulpit, and we want theologians in the pew. Yeah. So we have students who leave here and go off, and we have some who come here for a year or two and go off and do an engineering degree or nursing degree or whatever the case may be. So we're happy to put our students all over the place.
Yeah, interesting. One of the things that I find myself disappointed is not quite the right word, but wanting to see what can be done to fix it is to make the role of pastor far more valuable to the marketplace, more like it would have been
right
100 or 200 years ago.
Exactly. Yes.
I suspect that what you're doing educationally contributes to a solution there.
I think about this all the time, Marlon. I went to Westminster Theological Seminary, and I sat alongside people who coming out of Penn State with an engineering degree. So, they weren't getting necessarily a liberal arts humanities program in philosophy, literature, and history, and they get their MDiv and go and pastorate. So these students are getting a classical education and an education in the English Bible. So there's like 8 semesters of Bible survey.
Yeah.
They really know the English Bible. And then they're getting their Greek and Hebrew, so they can leave here and read Greek and Hebrew. So they're starting seminary not learning Greek and Hebrew. They're starting seminary able to read Greek and Hebrew. And we read von Maastricht and Turretin and Calvin as our theological textbooks. They're just going to be reading them for the second time in seminary. And so I just think, what a great 1-2 punch with this as an undergraduate education, that as a seminary. And then the other piece to it is our faculty are just great models for them too, like really invested in them and care about them and want to see them go off and be successful in this. And so they're also getting their mind is being well cared for, but they as a person are also being well cared for. So I'm very excited. Chris Larson, Ligonier's president, we talk about all the time. We think, what is that? It's almost like a flywheel effect. When you think about what the impact of these students will be over time.
Yeah, it is. It is really amazing to think about how we might see the culture reclaimed in America. And these I hesitate to call it grassroots because it's not quite that. As it relates to RBC, you're not trying, Ligonier's got a 1 million person mailing list. You're dealing with 200 students. It's very different, and it's leveraging those people very differently, those students.
Yeah, we talk about Ligonier's regular army. We're special forces. And
I like that. That's great. I like that.
And when Chris, again, President Ligonier, when Chris Larson talks, it's always to as many people as possible. That's the Ligonier mission, to as many people as possible. We're like that really, we're either at the bottom, or if you flip the pyramid, we're at the very top of the pyramid of that 200 elite forces that are specially trained and can be deployed. So
that's great. Let's change the subject here for just for the last part of this. You wrote a book on RC. It's called RC Sproul, A Life. I think I got the name of that right. Yeah.
Yes.
What possessed you? Okay, RC passed away, 8 years ago or so?
Soon. It was 2017.
2017. Okay.
Yeah, December 2017.
5 years. Yeah. I'm curious. Was this something that you'd given some thought to for a long time? How did it come about?
Well, I wrote mostly church history, and just before I came down here, I came down here in 2014. It was about 2012, 2013. My friends at Crossway, I was talking to them about a biography that I could do, because I thought, I've done all these people who are no longer with us. It might be interesting to do a 20th century figure. And I thought, how about RC? And then, Crossway said, sure, we contracted it. I think it was contracted in like 2012. Well, then I moved down here and started in as president, and that was 2014. And, the first 2 years writing was not, I wrote little books, but a big biography was not going to happen. And then, with RC, I wasn't sure how to end it. Wasn't sure what the final chapter was going to look like. We didn't know. Was he going to have another decade? And what next thing is he going to do?
Yeah.
That was RC. It was honestly, he would finish something. Like, I remember when I got down here, we finished the Reformation Study Bible, massive project overhaul of that thing. Put the latest edition out in 2015. We get it back, the first copy back. And we call everybody over there to the admin building. 15 people are in the room. RC says, put in front of RC, he looks at it, he goes, that's great. What's next? We're like, all right, all of 15 seconds of celebration. Let's move on.
Yeah.
But then, of course, RC was dramatic. So he's going to go out in the 500th anniversary year of the Protestant Reformation. So 2017 was a providentially timely year for RC's passing.
I never made that connection before, but you're absolutely right.
And actually, the last Ligonier talk he gave we did over at St. Andrew's Chapel on Reformation Day. We did a 500th anniversary event. And that was RC's last talk.
So that was October 31st.
It was. And it was on justification. But of course, it was on Aristotle, on the 5 types of causes. So that we could understand what is going on in justification, and the instrumental cause and the efficient cause. And he did all that in 18 minutes. And it was his last talk. No, I wanted to do the biography, and what I wanted to do was, everyone knew the platform RC, but he made it look effortless. He stood there without notes. He recalled nuances of Immanuel Kant's moral argument, Aristotle on cause, made the direct application to a biblical text, and also made you feel like he was your long lost friend. He made it effortless. And what I wanted to show was a lot of work went into that.
Yeah.
There were decades of feet under the desk, piles of books, slogging it through. And so I had fun in the 50s, 60s, early 70s study center years. And then, of course, the RC we all know.
Yeah. So you didn't answer the question that you left on the table. Did you not finish the book until he passed?
Right. And I didn't. I was starting it. Before he passed, I'd go over to his house and we would do interview sessions, which were delightful. I mean, absolutely delightful. They were my best memories. He'd sit in a chair and I'd sit on next to him. Sometimes Vesta would be running errands. Sometimes she'd be there. Can I tell you a quick story, Marlon, that you'll appreciate? In the middle of one of our talks, he got a call. And of course, always stopped and he did the call. Well, it was, and Vesta was sitting there. We're listening. It was obvious it was the golf course. The pro shop called him to tell him his driver was ready. And RC's like, yeah, okay, I'll pick it up tomorrow. And finishes up the call. And Vesta goes, a new golf club. And RC goes, well, it's my money.
Oops.
But if you know the Sprouls, as you do, that's just the sort of banter that they would often do with each other. But just to be part of that and to have that time with him was really wonderful. But no, honestly, it was COVID. COVID allowed me to hole up in my home and get the book done.
Wow, that's great.
So,
there aren't many people whose timing allows them to interview the person about whom you're writing and then finish it with the last chapter being their last chapter on earth.
Yeah.
That's
No,
a remarkable opportunity, quite frankly.
yeah, it really was. And yeah, I mean, I didn't put a lot of this in the book, but it helped me understand, like evangelicals and Catholics together. Historians can write about that. But that was a really hard moment in RC's life. Like, this is decades later, and he's saying that is the hardest thing I ever went through.
I actually remember living some of that as his friend. That was the time at which we had the most connection. And
right, mid-90s.
I was not involved in that, but I was kind of that's not the stuff that I have been qualified to be involved with. But what was interesting was to hear him talk about the struggles that had put him through, and the challenges, and his clear thinking was always a wonderful thing to witness and to experience as he talked through those things. Yeah, great stuff. Steve, this has been wonderful. A little bit of memory lane for me. Great to hear more about the college. And
yes, thank you.
Great to visit with you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Folks, you have been with us today on Veritas Vox with Steve Nichols, and this is the voice of classical Christian education. Thanks for joining us.